I'm Keltie Maguire, and you're listening to the Kids Are Childfree podcast.
Hello, and welcome to the Kids Are Childfree podcast. You're in for a treat today because we're doing a solo episode. I got to say, I get such nice feedback on these solo episodes. I know you love all of the fantastic guests that come on, but yeah, I've just had some really lovely positive feedback from you saying how much you enjoy these episodes. And so a few days ago, I went to my stories on Instagram. P.S. If you don't follow me on Instagram, give me a follow. It's at Kids or Childfree. And I said, what should I talk about in an upcoming solo episode? And I had some fantastic suggestions, hopefully all of which we will be able to table in future podcast episodes. But today I wanted to address a question or a topic that came from one of our longtime listeners, Lindsay. And she said she wants to know how it feels years into your child-free life choice. Now, I'm not going to talk in too much detail about the ins and outs of how life looks today as a child-free by choice woman who is 42 years old. I do want to share more about my life, by the way. It's not that I don't want to let you peek behind the curtain, but what I thought would be kind of cool to do, first of all, is to share emphasis on, I guess, when she asks how it feels. Let's talk about how it feels and specifically some of the perspectives that I've taken and what's shifted for me in my life as the result of this decision. And these are things that I really hope will apply regardless of what you ultimately choose. So this is not an episode specifically about being child-free, but it's really about perspectives that I think will be helpful for all of you to embrace as you go through and come through this decision process. So you can stay tuned for a future episode. I was thinking it would be really cool to have Chris on here, my husband. Shout out to Chris's episode. I think it was number 20, where he talked about his decision and how it intertwines with my decision. I thought it would be cool to have him on in the future so we can talk a little bit more about, like, what does our child-free life look like? How does it feel, in our relationship to have chosen not to have kids? And so we might get a little more nitty gritty, a little more personal in that one. But like I say, for this episode, it's really about looking at how do things look and feel on the other side of a decision, any decision you might make, using inspiration from my decision. So I'm going to be sharing from my own perspective, sort of how I see things here. But again, these are hopefully learnings, teachings, teachable moments that will be helpful to you no matter what you ultimately choose. So I've actually got 5 different points I want to make here and share with you. And the first is that something really wonderful about having made a decision now a few years ago is that you can kind of get on with it. You can get on with life. And interestingly, although in some ways my life hasn't changed that much since deciding not to have kids, because guess what? I still don't have kids, right? So the before and the after looks a little bit different, or I guess we can say less different than those of you who will choose to have a child or children. But what I find is that when we are indecisive, when we're unsure, when we're on the fence, we're sort of like leaving the door open for the possibility that there may be kids in our future. And that can really impact the kind of choices we make, what we say yes and no to, where we put our time, energy, and money. As an example, I know for a lot of people, when we think about the home that we live in, if you're thinking about maybe having a child, you might be then thinking that maybe we need to save for or invest in a bigger or different home. Maybe we need to think about moving somewhere else. Maybe we need to have more space. When you make a decision, you then can plan accordingly, whether it's making that move, saving the money, deciding you can stay put because you're not having kids. Making a decision allows you to actually have true forward momentum in your life. You can start planning in a way that you're not always hesitating. And it's not that myself and Chris and I weren't doing things in our life. I was running a business and then a different business, and we had made this move to Germany all in the midst of our indecision. But there was always this feeling, as an example, of like, okay, well, if we might have kids, then we should maybe go back to Canada after a year or two so we can have a kid before I'm 40 years of age, or whatever ideas I had in my head, okay? Knowing that there's no kid or kids coming, we can then feel more affirmative about the decisions we're making. And again, that comes down to like where you're living, where you're putting your money, the kind of risks you can take. Oftentimes when we're preparing or anticipating that we may have a child, that's going to really impact where we can spend money, how much risk or gamble we can take in our career or business. So it really changes the game when you make a decision. And I just want you to think about right now, based on the fact you're on the fence, what kind of space is that taking up in your life, both for decisions that you maybe are postponing or not making, or that you're having to take into account this potential child or children for a decision? And like energetically as well, it's a lot of time and energy when we're constantly fixated on and have this anxiety about making the right decision and how are we going to make the decision? And I want this today and I want that tomorrow and I wanted this an hour ago and I want that in 5 minutes. It's really exhausting. I know you know what I'm talking about. Okay, so my first point I want to make is that when we make a decision, you can get on with life and go enjoy the fruits of your decisions, if you will, whether that's having and enjoying having kids or planning for it. Maybe there's things you want to do before you have kids, but at least then you know, okay, the plan is to start trying in a year. So in the meantime, we're going to do X, Y, and Z. Or you can move along and continue cultivating the child-free life you have, really stepping into the possibilities that exist when you finally close the door on the idea that you might have kids. Okay, the second thing that I want to share is that confidence comes after a choice, not before. This one is really tricky for people because we have this idea that when we feel super confident, when we're sure, when we're 100%, when we're like, hell yes, I know what I want to do, then we'll make the decision. And I am sorry to be the bearer of bad news, but in most cases, especially if you're someone who's been on the fence, right? You're not someone who's felt really, really strongly one way or the other necessarily. Confidence is going to come after making a choice, not before. And this has certainly been the case in my journey. Now, I'm not saying you should decide if you're still feeling uncertain, but I think we need to remember, or maybe you don't need to remember, maybe you need to learn for the first time. And I'm telling you right now that actually the confident feelings that you hope to have with this decision might be on the other side of the decision once you make it, once you take that leap of faith. And so this is a really personal sort of discernment piece, but learning how to, I guess, get to confident enough, ready enough, good enough. And then knowing that that confidence will grow and build through taking action. I want you to think about anything in your life. Like we can use me and podcasting, for example. And some of you may or may not know, but this is the second podcast I've had. And when I first recorded a podcast episode for my old podcast that I had, P.S., I might have mentioned it or shouted it out before. You can still find it. It's called the Clarity Podcast. I no longer produce it, but if you search Keltie Maguire and the Clarity Podcast, you'll find that. It's more about business clarity, life clarity. You still may find it very interesting, as we all need clarity and direction in our lives. But when I recorded that first podcast episode, like I wasn't super confident. I didn't know the tools I was using. I didn't know how to get the right sound quality. I didn't know about the production process. I didn't necessarily feel confident hitting record and creating this episode for people to listen to. But I had to act. I had to start. I had to record. I had to put myself out there. And through recording one episode, 5 episodes, 20 episodes, that's where confidence started to really be cultivated. And that's why I've been pretty fortunate with this podcast in a way to come out of the gate, as confident as I've been able to, because I have that previous experience. That said, this is the first podcast I've done guest interviews. The other one is all solo podcast episodes, which, if you like my solo work, you might appreciate that other podcast. This is becoming an advertisement for the Clarity Podcast unknowingly, totally unintentionally. But yeah, when I decided to host guests on the podcast, I was really nervous about it. I had a lot of resistance. I didn't know how that was going to look, feel, the best way to be a great interviewer, etc. But it was only through going through that, feeling nervous. I remember totally having recording issues and blundering through, I think, my first 1 or 2 conversations. That's how I became more confident, how I became more proficient. We've got to take action. And that's where confidence then becomes cultivated. So to go back to the kids or child-free decision, let me know if you've ever heard this from a parent who has told you, I have a baby, mom, let's say, or it could be a dad. My partner has a baby. The doctor hands us this baby and we're basically supposed to go home 24 hours later or however long later. and we're thinking, oh my God, we have to keep this human alive. Are you mistaken? I'm supposed to go home with this little creature and I'm responsible for it. They don't feel confident at all, right? They've never done this before. They're scared. Everything's new. They're unsure about, feeding the baby and sleeping and making sure that it's, being kept warm and nurtured in the right way. Most parents will tell you it took such a time, and of course there's always new developmental stages with kids, but to feel more confident about themselves as a parent. And it's the same with being child-free. So it was really through me saying, I'm pretty darn sure I don't want kids. I still have doubts. I still have insecurities, but I am going to step into this life, and through living it, through making plans and decisions, through talking about my ambivalence, through celebrating this child-free path I've taken, through talking with other people, through doing the work that I do, all of these things have helped cultivate confidence in the decision I've made. All right, I have created something new for you. And let me tell you, if I was still on the fence about kids, I would be whipping out my credit card so fast right now in order to purchase what I'm about to share with you. I've created what I'm calling the Kids or Child-Free Support Series. And what this is this is a 6-month-long series of monthly recurring events, or occurring events, I should say, different topics each month that are going to help you tackle aspects of your decision that are keeping you stuck. The great thing about this series is I've kept the price super affordable. So each of these sessions is $45. And yes, you can pick and choose. You don't have to attend the whole series, but you can drop in and check out the events that relate best to where you're struggling. That said, if you want to take advantage of the whole series, I have what is called the All Access Pass. And that's going to give you access to all of these events for a further discounted price. So we've already had our first session, our January session, but if you want to take advantage of these 5 additional sessions and attend those either live, or yes, there will be a recording if you can't attend live, you're going to be able to get access to those for $150 for those 5 events, which works out to $30 a pop. Or again, you can purchase them a la carte, if you will, for $45 each. We've got sessions ranging from topics like, how do you make a decision in this sort of uncertain world that we're living in? We're going to be talking about FOMO one month. We're going to be talking about what to do with other people and their opinions on this topic. We've got lots of great stuff in store for you. And over and above these sessions, I have also created a dedicated Slack community where when you buy tickets to one or more of the events, or when you purchase your All Access Pass, you're going to get access to this Slack community where we're going to be having ongoing conversation and discussion about the different aspects of this decision that have got you feeling stuck. I'm going to be sharing different resources with you. It's going to be a private space where we can really discuss and get into this kids or child-free choice. So again, that is the Kids or Child-Free Support Series. I would be pulling my credit card out to purchase this All Access Pass because again, you're going to get access to 5 2-hour sessions on topics ranging from fear of missing out to what if you regret your decision in the future, all those things that I know are at the forefront of your mind. These are some of the topics that I hear from people again and again. And I'm going to be sharing exercises and questions. We'll be having discussion to help you navigate the different aspects of your kids or child-free choice. Okay, I will include the link with the details in the show notes of today's episode where you can get your All Access Pass or you can get tickets for upcoming events. I will mention the All Access Pass is only going to be available until mid-February when we have our second support series event. And after that, you can continue to purchase tickets on an ad hoc basis as you wish to attend them. All right, back to the show. Okay, the third thing I want to talk about when it comes to how it feels a few years into this child-free life choice and something that you can hopefully apply to your own decision no matter what you choose is to be present with what is. Practicing presence and looking at the life I have and cultivating enjoyment and joy and gratitude and peace and all those things, alignment with the life that I'm living, has been instrumental in me feeling good about it. And the way I like to frame it is that we need to be at peace with what is rather than what if. And this is not to say that your life today is perfect. I mean, we all always have opportunities for growth, improvement. We've got challenges and difficulties that come up, but focusing on what you have, looking at how you can work with the tools, the materials, if you will, that you have, rather than thinking about, oh gosh, what if I would have chosen otherwise? What if I had a kid now? Have I made the right decision? How's it going to be in the future? Did I make the wrong past choices? Being present with what is, being at peace with that, rather than constantly looking over your shoulder or future tripping, thinking what's to come. We want to learn to create happiness and contentment in the life we've chosen. We will always be miserable if we think about the things we could have done or that we maybe should have done or that we could do. At a certain point, we want to be present with the path that we have picked. All right. And that brings me to point number 4, which is kind of similar, but I want to expand on this a little bit more. And that is that I think it's really important to stay in your lane. Now, we live in a culture where it's often about, comparison, keeping up with the Joneses, looking at what they're doing, what they're wearing, how they're looking, what their Instagram pictures are like. We need to focus on ourselves. And I don't mean that in a self-centered way, although I think there's nothing wrong with focusing on ourselves and making the best that we can of ourselves in our own lives. But if you're looking around thinking, oh, they just had a baby and it must be so incredible. I mean, fine, it must be incredible. I'm sure it's wonderful and challenging, right? But looking around, if let's say you've chosen the child-free path of what other people are doing, people who've had kids and thinking that their lives are better and their lives are richer and that their relationships run deeper. Imagining that everyone else has so much more going on than you, especially people who've chosen a different decision, is just going to lead to unhappiness. When you have deliberately, intentionally made this decision, it can be helpful in the sense that it allows you to reside in knowing that I have chosen what feels best for me. I actually don't look at other people's lives and want any of what they have. Not because they have bad lives. I mean, don't get me wrong. I've got people who, friends who've got more money and maybe go on fancier vacations and they've got really lovely partners and whatever it is. But I don't look at any of those things because I have a freaking incredible partner who I chose for myself, who is that perfect fit for me. I am able to do these things that I want to do in my life that are meaningful to me. I choose to spend less money so I can have more different experiences. I choose to go hiking because that's where I want to spend my time. I don't need to go, shopping and get the designer handbag or whatever it is. And again, it's easy to fixate on other people and what they're doing. But when we ask ourselves, do I want that? Do I really want that? A lot of times the answer is no. And that said, if you do find yourself feeling really jealous of another person or comparing yourself with them, I think first of all, asking yourself, is their life or is what they have something I want? Because often our jealousy can be an indicator for the things that we want. And then that can be a chance to look at how can we cultivate this in our lives. So, for example, if I was comparing my partner with my friends' partners and thinking, well, he's so much sweeter to her than Chris is to me, or they get to do this together and we don't do that. That can be a chance or sort of a mirror held up to say, I want those things with my partner. But when it comes to this decision and fixating on I've chosen to have kids and now I'm looking at my child-free friends and constantly thinking about how fabulous their lives are, or I've chosen to be child-free and I'm looking at my friends with kids and thinking about all the stuff they've got going on, remember why you've chosen what you've chosen. Stay in your own lane. Going back to point number 3, practice presence, being at peace with what is. And also do yourself a favor and don't imagine that what someone else is doing is the better or best choice. I keep it super real, and I've got friends who have kids and they love having kids, and a lot of them have really wonderful children. But I look at them and I think, yeah, they have these beautiful moments and it's really cool and I'm happy for them. And I also remind myself that just like anyone else, they have struggles. And I don't see the sleepless nights, and I don't see the temper tantrums, and I don't see the behavioral issues they're having with their teenager. And I don't see the fact that maybe they as a couple don't get to connect as much because they're raising young children. If you have in your mind that everyone else has a shinier, better version of life than you, you will be unhappy. But the fact is we all have ups and downs. We all have challenges. We all grapple with things sometimes. So don't think about this kids or child-free decision as better or worse. I just like to think about it as different. People have chosen a different life than me. And again, I chose this life because that's what's best for me. And It's mine. This is my life. I don't want someone else's life because I've chosen and cultivated this. Okay, the last point I want to make about how things are a few years into my child-free life choice and how things may look for you, some things to help you along your way, is that I don't confuse difficult emotions with having made the wrong choice. If I feel wistful because I don't get to have, or I've chosen not to have the experience of having a baby, and I'm sure you've heard me talk about it on here before, I like babies. If I feel a little bit wistful about that, it's just that. It's an emotion. It's a feeling. It may feel yucky. It may be upsetting, but I don't make that mean that I made the wrong choice. It just means that that's a part of the experience of having kids that I perhaps would have really enjoyed or liked to have had. If I do, for example, see my friends going on a vacation with their kids and think like, oh, that's so cool, and I would love to do that, which, P.S., I quite love my child-free travel. So this is just really a hypothetical example. But if I see that and I feel jealous about that, or maybe it's like two couples and they both have kids and we're not invited because we don't have kids, just because I feel a jealousy doesn't mean I wish I had kids. I don't think, oh my gosh, I made the wrong choice. Now we're left out. Now we're going to be on the outside. I don't make it mean anything. I just make it, okay, I'm feeling a little bit jealous. It sucks to be excluded. I can feel that way. I can be annoyed. I can be angry. I can feel left out. But again, I don't then cross that divide to the next step that I see a lot of people taking in their mind, which is, I made the wrong choice. I think part of the reason a lot of you are flip-flopping back and forth in your decision is because when you have difficult emotions that come up around this choice, when you start to think about the things you might not experience or the fears that you have or the things that could go wrong or the parts you'll, not get to enjoy, you immediately go to this thought of, that must not be the choice for me then. I have to choose something different. I'm doing this wrong. I can't make a decision. No, you're just experiencing difficult emotions because you're a human. And as I've shared on here before, and I'll share it again, just because you choose one decision or another does not mean that you're going to be immune to difficult emotions. It's just what it is to be human. It's totally normal. We might not like it, but it comes with the territory. So this has been really key for me. I have a lot of people ask me about this. I was just talking about this on a podcast episode that I was on. I said, one of the reasons I'm able to be clear in my decision is because I don't confuse these challenging times or emotions that sometimes come up. And frankly, for me, they're not that often. But, if they are often or become often for you, perhaps if you make a decision, especially on that other side of the decision, immediately after having decided, doesn't mean you chose wrong. It just means you're feeling the feels for the things that you haven't chosen, the experiences you don't get to have. Okay? All right. I hope that helps. Again, let's just do a quick recap of those 5 points. So the first one is that, for me, having made a decision meant I could finally get on with your life. And this is what's available to you when you do finally decide is you can get on with it. You can close the door, the chapter and say, enough. This is what I'm chosen. This is what I'm moving towards. The second thing is that confidence comes for most of us after we make a choice. And I say again, most of us, because I think for as fence sitters, it's going to be really hard to get ourselves to a point where we're 100% sure before we've made the decision. Those things will generally come after. The third point I made is that practicing presence and being really present and at peace with what is in my life rather than what if has been really instrumental in feeling good about my decision. The next point I made was the fact that I think it's really important we stay in our own lane with this decision and we're not looking over our shoulder thinking, oh, what did our friend decide? What did our sister do? What's their life like? Is it better? It's just going to lead to dissatisfaction. It's true. And you, I'm sure, have many examples of this in your life right now, even outside of this decision. And again, that last point I made was the fact that I don't confuse having difficult emotions around this decision with having made the wrong choice. They're just difficult emotions. It doesn't mean I chose wrong. All right, that is all for me today. I hope you enjoyed this episode. I really enjoyed recording it for you. A little bit of a short and sweet one, I think. Who wants to hear me talk for an hour? Ooh, let me know. We do have some other fun episodes that are going to be coming up on the podcast. I'm going to be experimenting with a new format. And you know what? I'm just going to put the call out right now. I'm not going to tell you in this episode who it's going to be with. You'll have to tune into Instagram to find out. But I'm going to be having a former fence sitter onto the podcast, someone who is a mother. It's somebody who's actually been on the podcast before. I'm dropping a few hints. And her and I are going to be doing the very first episode of what I'm calling Dear Former Fence Sitter. We can say this is inspired by, Dear Abby columns of the newspapers of old. I really love the podcast Dear Sugar with Steve Almond and Cheryl Strayed. If any of you have listened to that podcast or maybe read the column that I think Cheryl Strayed still is a Substack by that name, but this is called Dear Former Fence Sitter. And what we're going to do is we're going to get your questions, whatever it is you're grappling with. I would love for you to either email me, which I will include in the show notes of today's episode, or you can DM me on Instagram. If you want, you can humor me and say, Dear Former Fence Sitter. Otherwise, you can just send me a note. And I want you to ask a question of both of us. And again, one of us is a mom, one of us is child-free, both former fence sitters. And we're going to weigh in and give you some suggestions in terms of how we'd be approaching your particular kids or child-free dilemma, decision, question, wherever you're grappling. Super excited about this. This is the very first time I've shared this new little project. Again, this isn't a whole dedicated other podcast, but this is going to be a type of episode that I'd like to bring in periodically to help answer some of your questions. All right, that is all from me. I hope you have yourself a wonderful rest of your day. All right, I've been a little bit lax with you lately. Allow me to explain. So I get messages on Instagram to my DMs or emails pretty much every single day from you saying how much you love the podcast, how you've discovered the work I'm doing through the podcast, how much you love the conversations on the podcast. Lots of praise. Yes, it is wonderful for my ego. I always enjoy getting these messages. It makes me feel really grateful and appreciative when you take the time to reach out. But the reason I say I've been a little bit lax lately is because when I first started the podcast, if I get positive feedback from anyone about an episode or the show, I would say, I would love for you to do me a favor and leave a rating or a review on Spotify or Apple Podcasts. And the last 2-3 months, I haven't been asking as much because, it's hard sometimes as a business owner and as a podcaster to say, hey, can you do me a little favor? But a big way the podcast gets discovered is through ratings and reviews. And it helps us to reach more people. And they really do make such a difference. I also, of course, love having this sort of social proof, if you will, to be able to show people this is what other people are saying and thinking about the podcast you want to tune into. So my ask of you, whether or not you've been one of those people who sent me a lovely note in the last 2-3 months, if I haven't asked you, I would love for you to leave either a rating and review on Apple Podcasts or a rating on Spotify. We are so close to cracking 200 5-star ratings or reviews on Spotify. We're 9 away right now. Can we get there in the next week? I would love to get to 200 5-star reviews or ratings, I should say, on Spotify. So if you are listening and you have not yet done so, go into the app, whether you're listening on Apple Podcasts or Spotify, please leave a rating or review. It will seriously take you 1 minute of your time, and I will be very grateful, and it will go a really long way to helping this podcast get out into more people who are on the fence's ears. That was a mouthful. All right. Thank you so much for tuning in, and I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day.